It was just a few years ago, people were complaining that there were not enough lens choices for Nikon Z mount. But fast forward to today, in year 2025, Nikon Z mount is actually the second largest mirrorless camera system right after Sony E-mount in terms of lens selection. And I mean native lenses, not including the adaptation of DSLR lenses or lenses from any other mounts. But with today's video, we are going back to the basics. How to choose the correct standard zoom lens for you. Right in my hands over here, I have the first ever Nikon Z mount zoom lens to be made, 2470 f4s. And the reason why I have one is because this thing is very cheap nowadays, but we will get into that in a second. So which lens is right for you if you're looking for a standard zoom? This is also a request I have received from a few people who watch my channel. So this video today is for you. So hi and welcome back to my channel. I'm Steven from X Kurogane Photos. I do content on photography when I feel like it and mainly camera gear. So back to today's topic. This is the list of standard zoom lenses available for Nikon Z mount as of early September 2025. 10 of them, including 2 super zooms. Yeah, that is a lot. So people can get confused, like which one is the correct one for me. Will I end up overspending on something I don't need, or will I end up buying something trashy and want something better? So this video today is to help you, to guide you which one to get. And I am going to factor in everything from zoom range to prices, your budget, and so on. And of course, today's video is about full frame cameras only. If I include APS-C, then yeah, the topic is a bit too broad, too big. And number 2, the prices I am about to quote, they are based on prices in my country, which is actually not too far off the official recommended retail prices in US dollars, and that is before any tariffs, of course, because the tariffs only apply to the United States. Alright, so getting to our first lens over here, the 24-50 f4 to 6.3. This is a kit lens that it is optional when you are buying a relatively entry-level Nikon full-frame camera, the Z5, the Z5 Mark II, or even the ZF. You may have the option to bundle this lens for an additional $250 or so. That is the bundle price. If you buy the lens separately, it is $400. And my advice is simple: stay away from this lens, with the exception of 2 conditions. Okay, so firstly, the price over here, $400 on its own. Never ever pay $400 for this lens. It is like a plastic toy lens of some kind. Even at the bundle price of $250, it is not quite worth it, because I would rather you buy a used copy for even less than $200 if you can find one. But the problem with this used price part is that it can differ from country to country. In my country, a used copy of this lens, 24-50, is roughly $150 to $175 US dollars equivalent, which in my opinion is still pretty expensive. Maybe I'm just a cheapskate. But if you take a look at the used market in China, everyone hated this lens so much, nobody wanted it. So the used price for one of these is around $120. Yep, $120. Less than 800 Chinese yuan. So, if you can find one for $120, then we are getting into the territory of low-budget Chinese prime lenses. Yes, and in that sense, you compare a cheap Chinese lens to actually a first-party Nikon lens that can zoom with autofocus, then $120 may seem like a no-brainer. It is like, hey, it is so cheap and I wanted a tiny lens that can zoom. I can just throw it into my bag and forget about it. In this kind of situations where you're actually finding an insane bargain, $120, then yes, maybe. So that is the first condition for buying one. You are able to find it so cheap, the price is so low that you wouldn't mind snatching one, then go ahead and purchase one. And number 2, the second condition for buying this lens is that you are looking for a compact, tiny lens specifically for a Nikon ZF. or a Nikon Z5, for example, like you're going out on the streets, you want to do street photography. Some people don't really shoot large apertures in street photography, and you want something tiny, inconspicuous, then yes, you may look into this lens. So the biggest negative about this lens obviously is the aperture range. From 24 to 50, as you zoom in, the aperture will drop really fast. f4.5, f5, f5.6, 6.3. By 50mm, you are at 6.3, which is really dark. So this is a daytime walk around lens, not really usable for much else other than maybe landscape. Yeah, landscape will be shooting at f5.6 or f8, then maybe yes. And this lens is also objectively the worst Nikon Z mount lens. Yes, objectively. But perspective is important. If you compare this 24 to 50 to an f-mount zoom lens from 10 years ago, then this 24 to 50 is actually better than the older f-mount kit lenses from 10 or 15 years ago. So in that sense, it is still a decent lens, but if you compare it to the entire Nikon Z mount lineup, it is the weakest lens. And it is completely in plastic, including the mount, which is why unless you can get it for dirt cheap, don't bother. Now moving on to the next one, the 24 to 70 f4S, which is the one I have right here. So the thing with this lens is that the prices have changed a lot throughout the years. When it first came out in 2018, together with the first generation Z6 and Z7, it was $1,000 brand new if purchased separately. And if you took this lens as a kit with a camera, any Nikon Z camera, you are paying roughly $600, a huge $400 price cut. But by today, in year 2025, I will still tell you not to pay $600 for this thing because you can find it for way cheaper. So can I recommend this lens? In terms of image quality and optical performance, it is a big yes. It may not be the best Nikon Z mount standard zoom lens. Obviously, the 24 to 120 that I will talk about later is a better lens than this one. But this is still an S-line lens. You need to remember that. It is S-line. The optical performance of this is incredible. It is better than any F-mount kit lenses ever made. Even the popular 24 to 120 f4G is a weaker lens than this optically. But the only problem is that it is being overshadowed by newer lenses that are slightly better than this one, but those newer lenses are also more expensive. And I would regard this to be an ideal budget option. Like, you stay away from the 24-50, but you couldn't afford a 24 to 120, this is the one you should be looking into. So, the way to get this lens very cheaply, number one, buy a grey import, which means no official warranty, but a grey import lens is way cheaper. It is not $600. A grey import copy of this lens is $500 or less than that. The second option, and this will save you a lot of money, is to buy a white box version of this lens. So basically, a white box lens applies to kit lenses maybe, the 24 to 70 like this one, 24 to 120, and sometimes the 24 to 200 as well. A white box kit lens is a lens that does not have its own original packaging because it was taken out from a kit. Someone else have purchased a new Nikon camera but opted not to take the kit lens. So the seller took out the lens and sold it separately. You will get the actual lens itself, the original front and rear cap, the original lens hood, and even the original pouch that came with the lens, but there is no original box. That is a white box kit lens. And you save a lot, because you won't be paying the full price of $1,000 for this thing. You'll be paying $500, $600, $500, sometimes even less. So if you combine option 1 and option 2, you buy a grey import white box lens. That is where you get an insane deal. Of course, looking for one is an entirely different challenge, but I managed to do that. The reason why I have one, this copy right here, is a white box grey import lens that I purchased brand new for $425 US. So I just paid a little bit over $400 for a brand new S-line zoom lens. Try to think about that for a second. And $400 is actually the market price for a used copy of this lens. If there is any camera store that you know in your country, in your state, which sells great import stuff next to the original warranty stuff because some people want to save a bit of money, you can always ask them, I want this kit lens, I want this 24-70, do you have a white box copy and a grey import? Sometimes they might have it, just that they never advertise it, you need to ask. But why would I buy a grey import camera or lens? I don't get any warranty, right? So here's my take on grey import stuff. If you are purchasing something extremely expensive, and by that I define as $1,000 or more, you need to buy the official ones with warranty in case something bad happens. But when you are purchasing something that costs $500 or less, warranty becomes less important, because in case you're unlucky enough, you got something broken, or you broke the lens yourself and you want it to be fixed, the repair cost will often match or exceed the price of the lens itself. So it does not make much sense to repair it in the first place. So warranty on a lower cost lens like this is less relevant. The next lens on this list is the 24-120 f4s at about $1,000 or $1,100, depends on your region. If you have roughly $1,000 to spend on a zoom lens and you don't know what to buy, you just want something that does it all, no matter what genre of photography. Street photography, for travel and vacation, for landscape, pretty much everything, maybe except bird photography, this is the lens to get. This lens is so exceptional that it is Nikon's best selling lens ever for the Z mount. And I'm not sure what sorcery Nikon came up with, because this lens is stack sharp throughout the entire zoom range. You're not losing any image quality from 24-120 or anywhere in between. This is something completely impossible to achieve just 10 years ago on DSLRs. The 24-120 f4G, the one I mentioned earlier, that lens is not that great on the wide end at 24. Yeah, and it is good somewhere in the middle, and then on the long end at 120, it became soft again, not very sharp. But that is not the case with the Z mount version. This lens is stack sharp. It is as sharp as prime lenses. However, if there is one single weakness of this lens you need to know about, the only weakness which may be a concern, it is the out of focus areas. The bokeh quality is kind of terrible. That is to be expected for a zoom lens with a range so big, and for a zoom lens that is so sharp. Yeah, normally when a lens becomes very sharp, you are kind of compromising the out of focus areas a bit. So that is the case with this lens. If you are a bokeh kind of person, you love smooth, creamy backgrounds, this may not be the lens for you, but at the same time, my advice is to get this lens anyway, and then you get a second cheap prime lens, maybe the 40 f2 by Nikon, or get an 85mm prime lens from a Chinese brand, up to you. Yeah, so you pair a second cheaper prime lens with this 24-120, you can't go wrong with this lens at all if you have $1,000. But at the same time, you only have enough budget for one lens. You only have $1,000 or $1,100 for that one zoom lens, and you want better bokeh. This is where the 28-75 f2.8 comes in, and you have two options over here. So there is the Nikon version, which is roughly $1,000 as well, and there is also the Tamron version, which is the G2 28-75, which is also roughly $1,000. And this is where the Nikon may seem a bad value, because the Nikon 28-75 f2.8 is actually a rebatch of the Tamron 28-75 G1, the older version, which has now been discontinued, right? So you are paying $1,000 for an older optic, and in this case, yes, get the Tamron G2, full stop, right? You don't care that much about a large zoom range. You want nicer background blurs, nicer bokeh. This is the lens to get, the Tamron G2. So why does the Nikon version even exist? Firstly, that lens came out before Tamron announced their G2. It was pretty sneaky on Tamron's part. But number two, there are still reasons why you should get the Nikon version, even though it is an older optic. Number one, if you are a working professional and you rely on your gear literally every day, you can't afford to have your lens stop working on any day. So it was just a few months ago, Nikon released a firmware 3.0 for the Nikon Z8, and that firmware made Tamron lenses stop working altogether. It was fixed a few days later with the firmware 3.01, but if you are a working professional, you can't afford to have something like this happen. You need your lenses to work. You need them to be reliable. This is where the Nikon version makes sense. So sometimes optical image quality is not everything. You need reliability, then you'll take a look at the Nikon version. The second scenario where the Nikon 28-75 makes sense, even though it is an older optic, is that you can get it cheap in a used market, because this lens is going for $700 or less used and often in excellent condition. So you have the $400 to $500 mark for the 24-70 f4s, and then there is a huge price gap all the way to $1,000 for the 24-120 or the 28-75 G2 for the Tamron, or a new copy of the Nikon 28-75. There is a $500 gap there. But in between, at $700 roughly, you can find a used Nikon 28-75. This is where this lens makes sense, and it is still a good lens if you want more light at f2.8 and you want more background blur. But wouldn't this logic apply to the Tamron G2 as well? If I can find the Tamron G2 used for $700 to $800, wouldn't that be the better purchase? The answer is yes. But the problem is that the Tamron G2 is very hard, nearly impossible to find a used copy in the used market. The only situation where you may find one is that there is a Nikon user jumping ship to some other brand and they are offloading their entire lineup. Then you may come across a used Tamron G2, but otherwise it is impossible to find that lens used. Once people buy it, they won't sell it. However, you can't say the same with the Nikon 28-75 because there are people who sell this lens to upgrade to the Tamron G2. Even though it is a minimal upgrade, the cost may not be justified, but there are people out there doing that. So find a used copy of the Nikon 28-75 is a lot easier than find a used copy of the Tamron G2. And then there is that one last obvious question: how do I choose between the 24-120 f4s and the 28-75 f2.8 regardless of brand? They are all $1,000. This is obvious. It depends on what kind of things you photograph. So if you are a freelancer or you're aiming to be one, you shoot events, conventions, weddings, you shoot in low light, then obviously the 28-75 f2.8 is the better choice, because f2.8 against f4, you are looking at the difference of one whole stop of light. You are looking at the difference between shooting at ISO 3200 or 6400. That is a big difference. Huge improvement in image quality just because you have f2.8. Yeah, so if you are buying the lens for vacations, for hiking, for landscape photography, you want an all-in-one lens solution, you don't want to be switching lenses out every often, then get the 24-120 f4s. It really depends what you want to shoot. There are no perfect lenses, so you don't need to worry about which lens is sharper. There is a slight difference between which one is sharper than which one, but I think what you plan to use the lens for is more important than which one is sharper. Now we move on to the next two lenses. This will be a quick one, the 24-70 f2.8 S-Line, both version 1 and the newer version 2, roughly $2,100 and $2,800 respectively. I mean, if you are not a working professional, you are not making money from photography full-time, there is really not much justification to buy any of these two lenses brand new. Now the question here is the used market, because we have the new f2.8 version 2, which means the prices of the version 1 may fall a little bit, and that also translates into lower used prices. Unfortunately, the bad news I have for you guys is that I don't think the version 1 will drop much in price, because there is such a big price gap between version 1 and version 2, even brand new. $700 of difference over there. So even if the version 1 gets a price cut, maybe it will be cheaper by $200. Instead of $2,100, it may be $1,800, $1,900, which means a used copy is also not that much cheaper. So currently in my country of Malaysia, a used copy of the 24-70 2.8 is roughly $1,600 to $1,700 equivalent. And I think if the price does fall to roughly $1,300, then you may want to start considering a used copy of the 24 to 70 2.8 version 1. Yes, $1,300 may be a good purchase because we will compare this to the Tamron G2 at 28 to 75mm. I will always take 24mm over 28. 24 and 28 is a big difference. Very big difference. If you shoot wider, you can always crop in ever so slightly. If your lens is not wide enough, you cannot zoom out unless you use AI, generative fill. Yeah. So wider is better, and I always prefer 24 over 28 given the choice. But the price gap between the 28 to 75 by Nikon or Tamron against the S-Line 24 to 70, the price gap is so big that I couldn't recommend it to any random hobbyist. Unless you are a dentist or a lawyer making good money, that is a completely different story altogether. But yeah, if you insist on getting the 2470 f2.8, especially the version 1, keep an eye on the used market in the coming months. The version 2 just came out. It is way too new. It is not going to affect the price of the version 1 yet, not in the short term, but in the medium term, in the next 12 months, you may want to pay attention. Yeah. However, do remember that the 2470 2.8 version 1 is heavy, 800 grams. In contrast, the Tamron is 550 grams roughly, and the 24 to 120 is 650, I think, roughly. Yeah, I don't remember the exact numbers, but they are not too heavy. So weight is also a consideration over there. The next lens on this list is a pretty quick one, the 28 to 135 f4PZ power zoom. This thing is big, this thing is heavy, and it is over $2,000. I forgot whether it is $2,000 or $2,500, but it is not cheap. And this is a lens that is very specialized. It is designed for filmmakers. So if you are doing photography, or even if you are a content creator on YouTube, you make videos for YouTube, this lens is still overkill. It is unnecessary. Unless you're aiming for a career as a filmmaker, then maybe. Yeah, so this is a lens so niche that I wouldn't recommend it to anyone who are watching this video of a small YouTuber over here. I mean, why would a professional take advice from a tiny hobbyist YouTuber, right? So this lens is irrelevant to most of you watching this video. Moving on to the next one over here, the 24 to 200 f4 to 6.3. So this is not a typical standard zoom, it is a super zoom in a way. This lens on its own can be found for around $900 to $1,000, but if you purchase a white box copy, brand new, you can find one for $800 or a bit less than that, yes. So who is this lens for? Personally, I would not sacrifice image quality for more zoom range than necessary. So the best balance is actually the 24 to 120 f4S, the best balance between image quality and zoom range. Once you go more than that, you are sacrificing a bit of image quality. For example, this 24 to 200, it won't be as sharp as any of the S lines out there, be it the 2470 or the 24 to 120. Yes, even the 24 to 70 f4S is a sharper lens than this 24 to 200, especially in the corners at the wide end 24-35mm. So the reason why you would get this lens is for convenience during travel. You go on vacation, you want one lens to rule it all, one single lens to shoot everything, and you want to zoom in far enough, then this lens may make some sense, but you are sacrificing aperture, you are sacrificing a bit of image quality, especially corner image quality. So I would personally see this lens as a traveler's lens. The second scenario where this lens may make some sense to you is that you are a landscape photographer who does a lot of hiking. You climb up mountains and so on to photograph stuff. Then you may not want something too heavy, but you need a longer zoom range to photograph mountains. So with landscape photography, normally we go for wide angle or ultra wide lenses, but when you are photographing stuff like mountains, you will want to zoom in more than usual. This is where the 24 to 200 makes sense. And the extension of this lens, a more extreme one, 28 to 400. This lens is expensive, around $1,300 US, but you're paying for the zoom all the way to 400 millimeters. but you will be sacrificing a lot of image quality. It won't be as sharp as any of the lenses I just covered throughout this entire video, maybe except the 24 to 50 at the beginning. Yes, this is a lens where you're purchasing it for the convenience of zooming very far at the expense of image quality. And the biggest weakness of this lens is the aperture f4 to f8. And that is not even the biggest problem. The biggest issue is that the aperture drops very fast. By 200 millimeters, you are down to f8. So the other half of the lens from 200 to 400 millimeters, you are stuck to f8 aperture, which is not good. Do you have any idea how bad f8 is as an aperture? You don't even have to wait until night time. At golden hour, when the sun is setting, you will be looking at 4 digits in ISO, 1600 to 3200, and then you can go into 5 digits in ISO easily at night. So f8 is not great. But at the same time, this lens works for some people. If you love safaris for some reason, or you love visiting national parks to photograph animals and birds, then this lens, even though it is only 400 millimeters, you can actually make it work. Yes, especially if you're using a high megapixel camera, a Z7 or a Z8. You activate DX mode, you still get 20 megapixels, and you are at equivalent 600 millimeters, which is sufficient for those kinds of use cases. You can also use this lens on a Z50 Mark II, any DX camera, and you get 600 millimeter equivalent. And this lens has VR, I believe. I think it does. So you can use it on APS-C as well. It is a very versatile lens in that regard. From what I'm aware, the f-mount 28 to 300 was a pretty popular lens, even though it wasn't good at all optically. And that was probably the reason why Nikon made this lens in the first place, because people will actually buy it. There are people out there who will value convenience over image quality. So this lens is for those kinds of people. For me, I don't think I can justify it. I think there should be a balance between image quality and zoom. And with today's video, my conclusion is that the best lens I can recommend throughout this entire list over here is the 24 to 120 f4s, with the Tamron G2 following a close second place for those of you who want to shoot in lower light. Best value versus performance ratio. Meanwhile, for those of you who don't have $1,000 to spend on a standard zoom lens, the best budget option in this list over here, 24 to 70 f4s. So I hope that this video is helpful for those of you who are asking which standard zoom lens I should purchase, and I hope that this guide can help you to decide which one is best for you. Until then, if you found this video to be helpful or informative, please do give this video a like, and most importantly, give this channel a subscribe. Yep, it is just one click away, one tap away on the screen, and that is how you help this channel grow. Until then, thanks a lot for watching, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.